Good evening, everyone. My name is Carolina Triana, and I'm the Arts and Culture Coordinator at Settlement Services International, SSI. On behalf of everyone this evening, I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet tonight, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and paying my respects to the elders past and present. We're here tonight for the third 2015 Speaker Series event. The Speaker Series is an arts and culture initiative aiming at creating a greater understanding and awareness on issues impacting refugees and asylum seekers living in the community. Tonight's discussion explores the views of second-generation Australians on migration, asylum seekers, ethnicity, how those views have changed over time, and what it means to newcomers. The panel tonight will explore this issue from different perspectives, and we hope to gain some useful insights on this topic. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the speakers and facilitators who are joining us tonight. Please put your hearts together and welcome the speakers. We're really so grateful to have a very eclectic and diverse lineup of speakers for tonight's event. Before I introduce you to the facilitator for tonight, I would like to let you know that this event is being recorded and streamed live on the internet. If you're on Twitter, you can also follow the conversation by using the hashtag SSI Speaker Series. I also need to point it out to you the emergency exit, and if you need to go to the toilet, please, you can find it on the next to the reception area on your left-hand side. Well, I would like now to introduce our facilitator for tonight, who's Kai Show. Welcome, Kai. Kai is a multimedia editor at the Australian Financial Review, where he runs the video team and also writes across a range of topics. After a career stint in accounting and marketing, Kai took a path less common amongst Australian-born Chinese by switching to journalism. Working at SBS as a radio journalist, then a business reporter at Sky News Business before moving to the Fairfax-owned Financial Review. He has a keen interest in diversity and multicultural issues. Thank you, Kai, for joining us tonight again, and over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Carolina. Okay, good evening, everyone. So tonight's topic is new arrivals. Are they an opportunity or a threat? Okay, so it's obviously, I think, a particularly topical issue at the moment. I think we're all aware of the debates and the challenges that Europe currently is facing with the crisis in Syria and the refugees or migrants, depending on, and that's just one of the points they're arguing about, whether they call them refugees or migrants over in Syria. But of course, we have our own homegrown challenges as well. Asylum seekers as an issue and refugees as an issue, but also migration and ethnic relations has been an issue for very, very long. Now, we hear a lot about this in mainstream media, and we read a lot about them in our papers, but often what is missing from them are the voices of migrant communities, which is somewhat ironic because they're mainly concerning migrant communities. So that's why I think we've really got a great opportunity tonight. We've got we've got a range of speakers here, some who are experts in this area of refugees and asylum seekers, and also efforts on how to combat racism, but also people from the ethnic communities themselves who have exposure to people in those communities and can talk about the type of views that they come across. Some of those views might surprise us too. So without further ado, I'm just going to introduce each of the speakers, and each of them is just going to give a brief give a brief opening statement about why they're here tonight. and just really a little bit about themselves just before and what they stand for and what they believe, just before we get into some Q&A. And of course, we'll be looking to take Q&A from members of the audience as well. So I'd like to start off by introducing Justin Trung, who is a third-year university student. He's a young chap compared to me, and he's studying commerce and law at UNSW. And he is an active member of the UNSW Law Student Society, as well as the Vietnamese Students Association of New South Wales. He's the president of the New South Wales branch, and he oversees the operation of chapters across 7 university branches. So it sounds like you were a busy man who's going to balance a lot of personalities, Justin. But yeah, could you all please make welcome Justin.
Well, I think that this issue is something that's really close to my heart, considering that most, as you guys may know, most Vietnamese Australians did come here as refugees. I think that, during the Vietnam War, most of our community, came to Australia. We made Australia our new home. So I think that this issue really is close to my heart. I think that, every wave of new Australians, there's always, contention as to whether, they might pose as a threat to our community. But I think, when we look back throughout history and throughout, all the migrant waves that have come, we've all said with ourselves, well, I believe that, we do contribute a lot to Australian society. And I think that most of us are better off with, diversity within our midst. I'm not sure what else to say.
Yeah, sure. No, thank you very much, Justin. Okay, so to his right is Lorenzo Bazzini. So Lorenzo is a second-generation Australian. He's the son of a migrant Italian who travelled to Australia to set up roots for his growing family in the late 50s. So I promise that wasn't me. I didn't think it was me. If it was, I apologise. So Lorenzo is the third of 4 children, and he's the first to be born in their new home of Sydney. So his father started a successful manufacturing company in 1960, which Lorenzo now owns and manages. And he also volunteers his time to the Italian organisation Co-ASIT, where he has been the president for 11 years. So in case you're wondering, Co-ASIT is a not-for-profit cultural organisation dedicated to the care of the aged and for the teaching of the Italian language in Australia. Lorenzo, please make him welcome.
Thank you, Kai, and thank you, everybody. I mean, it's an honour to be here tonight. I really don't know what to say. I'm very nervous. This is the first time that I'm here to speak about our community. It's a difficult community, and I can tell you that Italians, all probably 1 million. I wear, a million different hats because everybody has their own opinions about immigration, refugees, and I personally believe that my father had the opportunity to migrate, and for him it was a blessing to migrate to Australia. He was a teacher of agriculture in Italy, and yet post-war Italy was what it was, and therefore he saw the opportunity. I mean, I remember as a child him talking about seeing the many leaving from Le Marche, which is the central part of Italy. We're not north, we're not south, we're in the middle. So seeing a lot of people departing and going to what was then called La Buona America, the good America. So it was the United States, and I was lucky enough in 2005 to actually take a trip to Ground Zero, but also to visit Ellis Island, and I realised that my great-grandfather had been there in 1905, almost to the day. So, our family has known about, what it's like to migrate. I think that they were lucky enough to do it not on a boat. And however, I think that, it is a blessing for Australia and for the people that have come here to have found an Australia that has been open to accept them as citizens. There have been, some teething problems, but I think that, the majority, it's been a positive experience, and I think that we need to do as much as we can. We cannot. I have a particular view of what's going on about the Syrian crisis, and I actually posted something that may not have been well received a few days ago, where rather than receive, refugees, it's about probably stopping, the bombs rather than stop the boats. That's my personal view, and I feel strongly about it because, we keep sending over bombs and then, we don't do anything else. So that's my particular view about the refugee problem. I also have a lot of opinions of many of my friends whom I'm still in contact with through Facebook. I was an officer in the Italian army for a while, and obviously my father wanted me to have an Italian experience and education, so I ended up going to school in Italy, and with that came along a little 3-day visit to the local military district, and automatically I was drafted. So I didn't have a choice. I was either do it normally, and I was lucky enough that I had a diploma, so I ended up going to military school, and I was an officer for 15 months. So, with all of that, I also have a lot of views of the Italians that, have either returned back to Italy or that are thinking about, the requests of that, many want to leave because they have no hope. So, I put myself in the position of, I remember as a young teenager, seeing the boats arriving from Vietnam, from young parents. And today I see the boats that leave Syria and, the Mediterranean in general. So there's issues there, and I think that we ought to do more.
Thank you very much, Lorenzo. Angelo Gabrielatos, his primary expertise is in the development and implementation of campaigns in a range of social justice areas in Australia and overseas. So these include campaigns aimed at addressing the rights of Australia's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and their communities, the educational well-being of students from the lowest socioeconomic status communities, the development of policy around multiculturalism and multicultural education, and then the rights of asylum seekers and refugee children and their families. So he's the project director at Educational International, which is and he looks after their response to the growing commercialisation and privatisation of education. He was the federal president of the Australian Education Union, the teachers union, Angelo, yeah, for 7 years before he started working there. Would you please make him welcome?
Well, thank you very much, Clyde, for the introduction. And colleagues, thank you very much for the opportunity to be with you this afternoon, this evening. Could I please start off by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge any Aboriginal people present. I want to offer some opening remarks, observation from the perspective of a teacher and a teacher unionist. And these are remarks that I've made for most of my professional life, having held senior positions in the Australian Teacher Union movement and now in the global union teaching movement. I always take the view that when it comes to the well-being of a child, whether that child is in our classroom, in our school, in our state, in our country, or anywhere in the world, it's teacher business. And therefore, when we observe actions by policymakers, politicians, governments that undermine the rights of children, undermine the rights of children as they're articulated within the UN Convention on the Right of the Child, it's even more important that teachers express a view. It's because of that, many years ago, when the issue of detention of asylum seekers and refugees during the Howard government became a hot issue of discussion and disputation, we led the campaign aimed at getting kids out of detention. Because detention is no place for children nor their families. We were all shocked in the last week with respect to the images that we saw, those distressing images that we saw of that little boy on the beach of Turkey. But he's probably just one of many, many, many that have perished over the course of the last many years. Isn't it therefore so much more distressing that it took an image like that to generate and stimulate and act as a catalyst for some form of action globally, certainly across Europe? But that action thus far in Australia falls well short of what is required. On Sunday night, we were treated to a hoax by the Prime Minister. when he tried to portray a deep concern for the plight of asylum seekers and refugees trying to flee the devastation that is the Middle East, whether it's in Syria, Iraq or Afghanistan. The cruel hoax to say that we'll step up to the plate, quote unquote, and then not announce a single additional number to the humanitarian refugee intake. I hope that public opinion, and I trust based on events today, Abbott will be dragged along and making some sort of comment. And I think there will be a comment in the next day or two, increasing the intake, but it'll be well short of what's required. And as a result of that, we will continue to see children, innocent children, and their families, the victims of a world where the greater humanity that we once were very proud of is nowhere near where it should be and where it was some decades ago. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Angelo. And Priscilla Bryce, she's the founder and managing director of All Together Now, which was not only a sitcom I remember from the 1980s, but it's also Australia's only national racism prevention charity. So she was recently awarded a Churchill Fellowship that enabled her to visit, investigate and learn from anti-racism NGOs in Europe and North America last year. She was also awarded a University of Western Sydney Community Award in 2013 for establishing the award-winning One Parramatta project and All Together Now more broadly. Priscilla has more than a decade of experience managing social marketing and social change projects. She's currently studying for an MBA at UNSW, so maybe a short one to you, Justin, at some point. And she's just completed she has completed a graduate certificate in social impact back in 2011. And she also completed the Sydney Leadership Program back in 2008. So before she was in the not-for-profit sector, she was an equities research assistant in the investment banking sector. Boy, you must miss the money. So look, would you please make her welcome, Priscilla Bryce.
Thank you. I'd also like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of this land that we're meeting on tonight, and pay my respects to the elders past and present. Where should I start? That was such a good introduction. I don't even know where to start. Okay, I'm assuming that everyone here has a mobile phone. I'd love it if you could take it out and go to the iTunes store or the Google store if you have an Android phone, and search for Everyday Racism. This is one of our latest projects, and when you download it, you challenge yourself to play as either an Aboriginal man, a Muslim woman, or an Indian student for 7 days and see what it might be like to be a target of racism. This is the type of work that our organisation All Together Now does, trying to get people to understand, first of all, what racism is, and secondly, when they understand what racism is, what they can do about it, and generally that's to speak up or to speak out. What else can I tell you? The reason I started this organisation was I was working in Indigenous rights previously. I got to know some of the academics working in the area and started to understand their research and realised that there was no anti-racism organisation in Australia. And that came as quite a shock, and I actually didn't quite believe it was true. And you know, I spent a lot of time writing a business plan and stuff, and still no anti-racism organisation emerged. And so I thought, well, once you know that there's a problem, you can't then just sit on your hands and pretend that it's not there. You have to do something about it. You need to take personal responsibility. And so that's how All Together Now started about five or 6 years ago. That's about it, I think.
Great. No, there'll be plenty of time to expand on that more, but yes, could you please give all of our panelists a hand? Okay, so look, Justin, I thought I'll start with you. One of the things that we are here to talk about are the attitudes of generation migrants and really migrant communities in general. So you obviously being a member and, well, heading up the student organisation, but also being a member of the broader Vietnamese community. What have you found their attitudes to be towards asylum seekers? And before you answer that, I'd just like to remind all of the panellists, despite having less microphones than people. I do encourage you all to to interact with each other. You don't need to you don't need to wait for me. I'll of course pull you back if you do too much talking, but please, I want this to be a free-flowing conversation. And at a certain point, we'll open up the questions to you in the audience as well. But yeah, so Justin, tell us about what the Vietnamese think of the asylum seeker issues today.
Yeah, well, from my personal experience, I think that the general sentiment in the Vietnamese community is that we welcome asylum seekers because we always look back to our past experiences and our past community to see that if it wasn't for our opportunities to come to Australia and to migrate here or to be a refugee and be accepted here, we wouldn't have the opportunities that we have now. And I certainly wouldn't have had the opportunities I have now, to study in university and pursue higher education. I think that considering most of us do have that view, I think that our community is very open to asylum seekers. I think that the general view, I would say 99% of the people look forward to welcoming other people into our country. I think that even though, people from my generation might not have experienced that, and my parents were lucky enough to migrate here, not by boat, but by plane, they still have that I guess, acknowledgement and that gratefulness that our community had that opportunity. And I think that even though, I never experienced that myself, I still know from the people around me, from the general community, the hardships that kind of entailed from that. I think that without, yes, like Angela said, that there were teething problems, especially in the Vietnamese community, especially how Cabramatta was painted. I think now we're really growing up from that, and we are hopefully, a valuable community within the Australian community.
Okay, and I mean, have you ever, come across? With the Vietnamese community, do you though come across opinions occasionally that have some, about certain other ethnic groups or other groups that have migrated here that are, those that might be a little bit suspicious or anything like that, or has it always been a very welcoming one?
Yeah, I think that for the Vietnamese community, we're very welcoming of other races because, of course, in Cabramatta and in Bankstown, for example, the Vietnamese community, we coexist with, say, the Lebanese community, the Italian community. So there's a lot of, we like to share our food. That's something that we love to do. I'm sure all of you guys have tried Vietnamese food. That's something that we're very proud of. We like to share with other cultures. So we're very proud of ourselves as a culture, but we're also very open to share what we have with other cultures. And I think that's something that I am really proud of being a Vietnamese Australian. I think that our views are often very progressive in that sense.
Okay, thanks very much. So Lorenzo, can you tell us a bit more with the Italian community? You hinted at it before. There's quite a diversity of views there and different and often strong opinions.
I believe that the majority of seniors, let's call them, the first generation, understand that there were different times, and therefore they're less prone to criticise the unbridled taking of refugees. And I'm always referring both to the European as well as the Australian situation. So therefore, that is the majority of you. However, the younger generation seem to have an opinion whereby, they're more structured. They've come in under a particular visa or whatever it needs to be, and therefore they're the ones that probably criticise the most and, object to, people coming in and then being, helped. They don't understand, the problem behind. One of the things that obviously there's been quite a number of remarks about the child that was, that landed on the beach in Turkey. I mean, a lot of people were actually quite sensitive, and I found it, interesting to see that a lot of the criticism was, well, why was it okay to have children dying in a building in Syria, but then the moment it lands on a European beach, we have a problem So, yeah, and that's where I go back to the issue of, the bombing. If it doesn't stop, it's not going to stop, unless, there's lots and lots of resources thrown at it. So I think that, the current generation, there's a lot of youngsters that believe that, and I probably would put, the second generation in that lot where, it's about structuring people that, back in the days before you could get somebody out here, you had, questioning time at the, a particular embassy in Europe, and, the husband was being questioned over here. So there was that type of, of scrutiny by the government here locally. So, that's where there's probably a bit of resentment in having, free entry to everybody.
And would you say that's because they feel that we did it tough, and therefore others should as well?
Well, we know the Italian's always crying, so, we always say that, crying is half of the game whenever we play, any particular game, especially soccer. But I think that, it is, a lot of them do resent the fact that, they had to go through, all the paperwork, and, some people may not do that today. So, yes.
Okay, so Angela, you do a lot of work with asylum seekers and refugees. Have you come across, like, have you been surprised by what you've come across in terms of views from some migrant communities?
Well, the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that our migrant communities aren't homogenous. And in each migrant community, whether it's the Greek community, whatever that's defined as nowadays, or the Italian or Vietnamese, etc., you have a diversity of views, a diversity of perspective, a diversity of social and cultural and political outlooks. And across that spectrum, you'll find an equal number of differing views as you would in the dominant Anglo communities. One would, though, expect that those who are of a generation that have experienced migration and hardship themselves may be more tolerant and accepting of those that follow, but that is not necessarily always the case. But I fear that what's emerged in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years in Australia is also coloured by some other prejudicial and discriminatory layers as well, namely the Muslim other, the Arab other. The statements that we heard in Europe last week and in Australia in the last 2 days build the cat with respect to that discrimination in terms of the Muslim other. When the Minister for Education in Hungary said that accepting these Syrian refugees would disturb the balance of Christian Europe, I think enough was said. When Poland and Slovakian leaders said a couple of days ago that we'll only accept Christian asylum seekers, a lot was said. And when Corey Bernardi today and Eric Abetz today talked about Christians being accepted, I think a lot was spoken, and that reinforces where it doesn't already exist. It gives rise to and reinforces and legitimises the prejudice that we've seen for far too long in Australia with respect to the Muslim other. In news this afternoon, respected Canberra journalist described conversations he had with liberal backbenchers who said, well, clearly we wouldn't want too many more Muslim men coming to Australia. I think that's a new dimension of the last 15 or 20 years, certainly a post-September 9/11 phenomenon that people don't want to acknowledge, but as far as I'm concerned, it is very much at the forefront of a lot of the thinking, at least, if not articulated, certainly in the back of everyone's mind, and that prejudice is very apparent in the body politic when it comes to migration, asylum seekers and refugees. And it's evident amongst migrant communities themselves. Those same prejudices are evident in migrant communities themselves.
And is that just because it's something that's common across all of humanity, the fear of other? Like, why do you think?
Well, the fear of other is something that is something that is cross-cultural and is evident in many different cultures, or in fact in all cultures. The fear of the other is very strong. But I'm saying there's something more than just the fear of the other. So I'm saying there's a very definite political narrative here that is alive and well, regrettably.
Yeah. So you've mentioned Islamophobia in particular.
I hate that term, but for the lack
Yeah,
of a better
sure.
term.
No, I understand. Or people particularly thinking of people from a Muslim background a certain way. But isn't there just a general suspicion, don't you think, of like in the Australian community of many of the refugees coming in? Because that also, of course, would include people from Africa, like the Sudan, for example. It would also include Arab Christians, for example, who, I mean, to be fair, certainly are being persecuted quite heavily over there. So is it just an anti-Muslim sentiment, or is there just a general distrust of anything new and different?
Just so we're clear, I did not wish in any way, shape or form to diminish the persecution being experienced by a minority group. I'm nervous. I've been evicted from too many cities,
Pick your words carefully now.
I didn't want to diminish in any way, shape or form the persecution being experienced by a number of minorities across the Middle East. I didn't want to diminish that. And certainly action needs to be taken with respect to that. But what I'm referring to is a dominant narrative that far outweighs what you've said. That level of sophistication is not evident on the front page of the Daily Telegraph. It's not evident on the talkback radio 2GB and 2UE, where racism is basically legitimised and fanned. So I think they're the factors that we can't ignore in the current climate. That was a layer that was not evident in previous waves of migrants and asylum seekers and refugees in Australia. That's not to say there wasn't serious issues in terms of, sort of those who are no longer at the bottom of the rung, feeling empowered to present themselves as somehow superior to those who've come in last. There's all that stuff, but I'm saying there's a very definite dominant narrative in Australia in the last 15 or 20 years, and globally in the last 15, 20 years.
Okay. Now, Priscilla, what Angela's just mentioned there is something that you've briefly come across as well. This idea that many ethnic groups that come here, often when, to put it bluntly, when society starts picking on another group, then they often think, well, thank goodness I'm no longer at the bottom of the pile. I mean, is that something you come across as well?
Yeah, I have. We work very closely with academics, and they have told us that people who have been the victim or the target of racism sometimes do become a perpetrator, or even often become a perpetrator. So that is a thing. And also, I wanted to back up what you said, actually. The academics have also told us that the people who are most likely to be targets of racism in Australia are Aboriginal people and Muslim Australians at the moment. So that's a fact. That's a fact, yeah.
Okay, now Priscilla, one of the, obviously working for an anti-racism charity, I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but if you were going to give Australia a report card on how successful we are at managing all of our issues around racism and so forth, how do we stack up, do you think, Australia these days? Because many people would say we're doing pretty well, right?
Well, I guess the fact of the matter is that around 50% of Australians are positive about cultural diversity, about 40% are ambivalent, and then there's around 10% who have very problematic racist views. So people with racist views are actually in the minority. So, it depends how you see the issue. If you see that as that being a small problem, then yeah, it probably is. However, the effect of racism is quite large. So the academics, again, I'll go back to them, they say that there's real health effects from racism. For example, people who frequently experience racism, and these studies have been done particularly, they've studied Aboriginal people in particular, is that they have, high rates of diabetes, anxiety, depression, and that is a direct result of racism. So I don't, even though there's only 10% of people who have those racist views, the effect they have on our society is problematic. There's also a report called the Scanlon Social Cohesion Report. It comes out once every year. It's provided by the Scanlon Foundation, which is based in Melbourne, and they measure a whole bunch of social cohesion measures, and one of them is racism and people's experience of racism. And each year for probably the past 5 years now, it's been climbing higher and higher. So last year it was 18%, the previous year it was 19%. That's quite large. So when I say 18 to 19%, that many people have experienced racism in the previous year. That's 1 in 5 people have experienced racism in the past year. When you think of Australia's population, that's quite a few million people. That's a lot. So it depends how you think about it, how you want to think about it. I don't think there's one direct answer. Is Australia really racist compared to other countries? I don't, it's a hard thing to discuss because there's lots of different measures and lots of different ways of measuring it. But we could certainly do better.
Sure.
Yeah.
So can you just tell us, I mean, for many of us, we may not have experienced a lot of racism, especially in the younger generations. I mean, what are some of the common forms that you come across? I mean, even just, for example, the examples you do in the app. Perhaps you can just tell us why you picked particular groups in that app.
Yeah, of course. So there's a few different types of racism. One is interpersonal racism. So clearly, 2 people or more people. So the academics call this everyday racism, but it's also commonly known as casual racism. And it's a type of racism that you could experience, on a daily basis almost. So the academics have done studies to work out how often this happens in Australia. And most recently, the most recent study on this was around 2007, I think. So the most common type of interpersonal racism is racist talk. So that would be, verbal abuse, name calling, and that type of thing. And around 20% of people have experienced that type of racism at some point.
So when you say 20% of people,
Who were surveyed.
Oh, right.
Who were surveyed, yeah. So I don't know how many people they surveyed in this study, but yeah, that's a lot of 1 in 5 people, it's a lot. And that's followed by exclusion. So this is a very subtle, covert form of racism. Some of you might have remembered the Beyond Blue ad that they created last year about racism. And there was a little scene in there where someone got onto a bus and they saw an Aboriginal man sitting there, and the only spare seat on the bus was next to him. And when they walked down the aisle of the bus, they saw the seat and then turned around as if they didn't see the spare seat because they could see that's an Aboriginal person. I don't want to sit next to an Aboriginal person, so I'm just going to pretend that, that didn't happen. That is definitely racism, and that's what we would term exclusion, ignoring somebody because on the basis of their race, their cultural background, their ethnicity. And other types would be unfair treatment or attack. We've seen plenty of incidences of attacks on trains. Thanks to mobile phones, people are now recording evidence. And in addition to all these types of interpersonal racism, there are other types, such as institutionalized racism. So that would be when you try and get a job, but you don't get a job interview because the person who was scanning CVs saw your name and decided, oh, well, they're from an ethnicity that I'm not, I don't like, so I'm not going to even give them an interview. Apparently that happens quite frequently as well, and you don't even know. So there's lots of different types of racism, and I think when you start thinking about it like that, you might be surprised that you might have been a victim or a target of racism at some point.
So I'm interested to know, in particular, say Justin and Lorenzo. Tell us about the racism experiences that you've either seen or witnessed or even been told about here in Australia. Justin.
I'll never finish.
No, don't worry, I'll keep you on track. Yeah.
You will, okay. Well, I think I've learned through my personal experience that it's how you deal with it. I remember Mortlake Public School. I was regularly locked up in the toilets because I was the only, Italian in school. We used to live in Mortlake, near the gas depots. Every time, I brought some sandwiches to school which didn't conform, it'd end up in the bin. You went through, I'll never forget, it was actually quite funny because I had a particular teacher, he was I can't remember the actual term, but was a schoolmaster, and, I had an English accent. And he came to me one day and he said, "Lorenzo, you have an English accent." And I turned around and said, "Yeah, I lived in London for a couple of months, so therefore that's why I have an English accent." I didn't understand. I mean, I had an issue with my English. I'd lived quite a long period here, then I'd been in Italy, then I'd come back, then I'd gone to Italy. So I had, a long stint in Italy, and when I came back here, I had to relearn. I had to relearn English. I had to relearn Italian as I went there, and I'll never forget. I kept repeating. In Italy, you had, through summer, you have a period where everybody else is having a holiday. Instead, I was studying all subjects. So therefore, it didn't matter where I went. You cop racing because over there I was a skip, over here I'm a wog. So therefore, you just learn to deal with it.
But is that something that you see in this day and age amongst the Italian community? Even in the Italian community, because many would think, well, everyone knows about the Greeks and Italians that came over in the post-war period. They're a much more established community. They surely have assimilated and acclimatized to Australia.
Well, that's
what happens today?
Well, I think that today there's still a lot of it. Okay, in my opinion, I'll give you an example. I was just watching a little clip on YouTube, and it was about a poor gentleman who was washing himself at an Italian fountain. Now, fountains in Italy are normally used for drinking. This poor gentleman was probably preparing for prayer, and therefore had to wash something. And the abuse he got because however you look at that, and I was thinking about it, and I thought, is it because, I don't think that the Italian gentleman that was actually, telling him all sorts of things, understood what he was doing. For him, it was somebody that's washing his feet where I normally drink. However, the gentleman was getting ready to go and have his primo, and therefore I had to wash. And you can see the way it was, I've learned that through a bit of travel. So, they're the sorts of things that can happen. It doesn't matter where you are, they can happen. So, it's still there. You see it in the workplace, still today where, I employ a number of young gentlemen that are Italian, and, they have difficulties on construction sites. But it's normal.
What do you mean by?
Well, they sort of make fun of you, and I know when they are doing that because I get reports back that your English isn't perfect. And you try. That's why we probably use our hands so much. You gesticulate, and try and get yourself understood. But unfortunately, on construction sites, sometimes it doesn't help. So these are all YELTS approved. 5.5, 6, whatever it needs to be. However, they still have difficulty, and on some sites it's normal.
So, Justin, the Vietnamese community, decades ago, people would remember there was a lot of tension there, and as you've mentioned, there's often been some stereotypes about the Vietnamese in the past. Some of the organised crime that would happen there, and many people would say, well, the Vietnamese, they don't have any problems today. As you said, everyone loves Vietnamese food, right? So do you? How settled into the community are the Vietnamese? Do they experience any challenges from what you've seen?
I think that the biggest challenge that the Vietnamese community may have would be, I guess, communication. I think considering that most of the older generation, they wouldn't have gone through the school system, or their English isn't good. I guess, it's hard for them to communicate and I guess express their views with the rest of Australia. It's better with my generation and those who went through the public school or any school system and then through higher education. But for the more senior people within the community, they kind of, I guess, they do sometimes want to participate in, I guess, civic dialogue, but it's rather difficult for them because they can't communicate and they just tend to stick to themselves. And I find that I think that's quite a pity because they might have opinions that could elevate our discussion on certain topics. I think that's the most difficult thing for the Vietnamese community. And I guess also our number, because we're pretty small, as say compared to the Italian community in numbers. So I guess we might not be heard as much when we do communicate. And I think that would be the overview of what our issues are.
Okay, so Angela, I mean, you work a fair amount with asylum seekers, and I know you do as well, Priscilla. How much of an issue is language and accents in this day and age?
Well, language is an issue. Language is a barrier. And in the absence of language, being able to engage effectively in community is very difficult. And with that comes alienation, disengagement, a greater sense of becoming more introverted, inward-looking within community. And all those factors thereafter start contributing to a dynamic that is not conducive to that greater, more socially cohesive environment. So these are factors, sort of when Howard was saying you've got to speak English, remember those speeches he gave, you must speak English here in Australia? Well, when he was cutting the funding of programs to teach English. Now that wasn't lost on people. So government policy, there's plenty of evidence that shows that what needs to be done in terms to achieve a greater social cohesion, in terms of a greater engagement participation, but the funding and the resources to achieve it have not been there. Now, of course, that manifests itself differently in terms of generational issues. In terms of people who are older in the community as opposed to those who are younger in the community. These are factors that need to be taken into consideration, and unfortunately, they're not. We've had experience in terms of policy formulation in Australia that no sooner have we dealt with and learned from the experience of one wave of migration that you would have thought would put in place the necessary policy settings to avoid a repetition, that we've seen that not occur. In fact, we've had cuts to programs that have been successful with one wave of migration and not continued with subsequent waves of migration. And I think there's plenty of examples of that over the course of the last many years. These are policy failings, and largely because of political decisions that have been made by governments of the day, which have not been much in the interest of achieving that greatest possible social cohesion. And as I said, some recent political dynamics only contribute to that in a much more toxic way than what they did in the past.
I mean, Lorenzo, I see you nodding there. Just tell us about your own experience with that.
Well, on the subject, and I think Angela's touched a subject that is very, very sore with me, because I coined the phrase and I started using it in my first speech when I became president of Kaiser. That is, we're doing more with less. The cuts that we've had are just incredible. I always thought that if you've got something that is functional, that works properly, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. So, we've been looking after our community and we're spreading out like no other community. We're really getting, a great deal of satisfaction. However, our waiting lists are getting longer. Basically, the government has made a decision that, well, they're going to die sooner or later, so we're not going to have a waiting list one day. And it's really frustrating for me as a president, because I can see that, you know, there's already cuts in 2017 and 2018, you know, because they just believe that cuts need to be cut. It's frustrating because I can see that, you know, every single community, if they looked at our system, our plan, the way that we set up COASIT, and I mean, I owe it all to, you know, the president that have been there before me, who had an incredible vision. You know, one was Peter Migliorino and Commendador Giuseppe, you know, all of the directors of the past, you know, they've managed to provide an incredible amount of assistance to the community. And, you know, they're all talking about wanting to keep people at home. You know, they don't want them going into high care, you know, hospitals and facilities. And yet we cut programs which keep people in home.
So where does the funding come from?
It's federal.
It's from the federal level.
So
why do you think that funding has been withdrawn? Is it because of a sense, well, the Italian community is okay now?
To a certain extent, they look at the agencies, the NGOs that have been there and that have established themselves. They see them as a cost, you know, that we're there. And it's probably, maybe there are reasons behind which we don't understand, or certainly my pay grade doesn't, you know, allow me to get up to. But I'm sure that, you know, they're looking at, you know, conspiracy theories of organisations being able to, you know, channel funds into terrorism and God knows whatever else. But, you know, the sad part for me is that our people will suffer. You know, the elderly, the most vulnerable, and I mean, I feel strongly about it because my grandfather, I had an experience with him when, you know, when he's dying dead in hospital. You know, I saw these doctors around him, they were flicking and doing anything. He was, you know, I saw him there in bed and he was helpless. So I promised myself that I would help as much as I can whoever was helpless. And this is where I feel strongly about the elderly in our community. They're at home, you know, they've been captains of industry when they were working, you know, they ran. You know, I mean, I go back to the construction industry, that's where I've been all my life. And, you know, they ran incredible companies and they were, you know, foremen and managers and whatever else. And today they can't get anything because they don't speak. It's not, you know, they forget their English that they've learned through the experience of life. And, you know, they're at home and they're caring for somebody. And then, you know, people today want you to go on a smartphone and get assistance to become a carer. How do you do that? I mean, I don't know. My mother, you know, even my, you know, I'm glad that I'm a computer programmer, so I've got some skills and I could probably get my phone out and find, you know, the website. But at the end of the day, the majority of people that are out there haven't got a clue. You know, they don't even have a mobile phone, let alone a smartphone. And we're asking them to go on a website and find out all about it. You know, and we cut for the sake of cutting. That's the part I really don't understand. You know, I have a vested interest through COASIT. I mean, you know, I've been working for COASIT as a director since 1984. I work as a volunteer. I don't get paid, and I do it because I believe in it. You know, my father always said that, you know, you need to give back something, and this is why I give back to the community. But, you know, it's sad for me to see that certain things are being done which are wrong, and you know.
Okay. So look, on that note, everyone, I'd like to open the question and answer to the audience. So it's a small room, so you know you won't need a microphone run over to you. But does anyone have any questions? And if so, if you could just pop your hand up and just let us know which of the panel members you'd like to direct your question to, and perhaps also just tell us where you're from as well. Any questions? Yes, at the back.
I'd like to direct my name is Juliana from the Southwest Police Force. I'd like to direct my question to Lorenzo. And one of the question and the comment, Lorenzo, you said, I've learned to deal with it in relation to racism. I've learned to deal with it.
Yeah.
And what that prompts for me is, why should it be the responsibility of the victim to deal with it? As in many cases, that in many issues that we face in Australia, there's a lot of responsibility that we put on victims to deal with it, when it's really an insidious institutional process that needs to be dealt with at an institutional and a structural level. Why the victim?
I suppose I've learned to deal with it because, you know, I was always puny. You know, I was never big. I'm big now, and I could sit on you and, you know, you'd be in trouble. But, you know, when I was a young boy and I was, you know, learning to deal with, you know, the problem of being, you know, a young ethnic in, you know, the local context, I always thought that, you know, you need to survive because if you do survive, then you can do something about it later on. And that's I think that, you know, there's that instinct of surviving. You know, if you deal with it, I think that you could probably end up, you know, today, you know, there are courts and ways of dealing with the problem, which we didn't have back then. So, you know, as I went through my life and, you know, I mean, it was called wog ball, it wasn't soccer. So therefore, you just had to deal with it and just got on with life, and it was just another day, you know, in paradise.
I think there's been some recent, we've come across this whole notion of, you know, just get over it, you know, just move on. We saw that with the Adam Goods incidents where a number of conservative commentators were saying, look, you should just move on. Well, who are you to tell me to move on? You know? Who are you to tell me to ignore the racism that I'm encountering? There's no such thing as move on. I'll move on when and if I'm ready, not when it suits you and your dominant position for me to be silent and behave in the way that you want me to behave. I understand, I think, what Lorenzo said I learned to do with it because he wanted to move on. But there's a quantum difference between dealing with it when you're ready and dealing with it in your terms and someone else telling you you can now deal with it. We're a bit tired of this now, we can move on. No. 2 years ago, some of my political adversaries, and I've got many in Australia, you know, as a senior union leader, started describing me as the Ayatollah. Well, you know, I didn't take too kindly to them. Why weren't my predecessors, my Anglo predecessors, called the Ayatollah? Why was I called the Ayatollah? Was I had a beard? Olive skin? It was clearly derogatory. It was racist. And I was told, just deal with it and move on. Who are you to tell me that? So there is an issue here. We'll move on when we're ready, and we'll deal with it in the way we see fit with respect to my personal hurt, let alone the political dynamic and dimension of it. And one way you deal with it, you call it out. You call it out. Why should we remain silent when there's such forms of racism around us? I held a senior position in the Australian political landscape as the national president of the second largest union in the country. And I was called Ayatollah by adversaries. You know, racism is alive and well. It's alive and well.
So, Priscilla, one of the initiatives that you've been a part of has been the It Stops With Me campaign. So what Angela said about calling it out, just tell us how do people achieve that? How do they do that? That's something that you try to make happen.
Yeah, so the Racism That Stops With Me campaign is part of the Australian Human Rights Commission. I think it's been going for about 3 or 4 years now, and encourages people to speak out when they witness racism. How to do it? It depends partly on your personality. Some people are very good at humour. I'm not. But if you are, then you can kind of make a joke and distract the perpetrator. Now there's a comedian whose name I can't remember, Australian comedian, and I read a story of his recently. And he was walking through a park late one night, and some guys were standing over by a tree and yelled out some racist remarks to him. And what he did was walk over to them and go, "Oh, hi guys, happy birthday." And they had no idea what to do because it was so, out there. And he started a conversation with them, and they kind of by the end of it, like he just walked away and they were all laughing together. So if you have that skill, then that's definitely one way of doing it. If you don't, you can just ask them a question. Why did you say that? Particularly if you know them, you can challenge them on it and say, look, I thought you're a reasonable person. I'm really surprised to hear that you've said that. I would say don't call somebody a racist, only because once you call someone something like that, they're automatically going to get defensive and they're not going to listen to anything you say after that. So, it's really hard because when you're really angry about something and you know that it's wrong, the first thing that comes to mind is, oh, I just want to get them back, and so you want to call them names. But the best thing is to try and resist doing that because it's not going to get them to change.
So Priscilla, it's interesting that you say that. I mean, because when you look at the way that media discussion often goes, it does seem to be a bit of a label arms race, right? I mean, both sides hurling different labels, and you hear every kind used to describe every possible group, people with certain opinions and are labelled a certain way, not even people with certain characteristics. When you see people using the racist tag in the mainstream media, I mean, does that disappoint you? Isn't that just calling out racism to label someone a racist who does have those views?
Generally, yes. I mean, if it's an incident of interpersonal racism, I would say don't call someone a racist for the reasons I've said. But there are some people who clearly have racist views, and I think it can be helpful to call that out because you're giving something that's evil a name, and by being able to do that, you're letting people understand that it's wrong and you think it's wrong. So I think it depends on the circumstance.
But wouldn't they also become defensive, and because of their prominence? I mean, you think about some of the the AM radio hosts who have enormous audiences out there. Right? I mean, if you were to make them defensive, no, never. But if they become defensive, isn't that a huge manifestation of that defensiveness and closed-mindedness that you're fearing?
I guess so. I think it depends on what you want to achieve by your action. So in that case, we're talking more about society discussing the issues rather than, because those particular people that you're talking about, whose names we won't mention, that we're pretty sure that they are not going to change their view. And so the objective of us calling racism out is not really to get them to change, because they're probably not, let's face it. So the objective is really for us to discuss it as a society and try and work out solutions for reducing racism. And so in that case, I think you need to call it out. Yeah.
Yes, we have a lady at the front here.
Yes, thanks to both for your time. I'm the board member of Iranian community in Sydney, and we regularly and annually run many cultural and social activities and events. But the issue is we never have any Iranian second generation audience in our programs. Even when we target this part of the community, they don't attend and they don't show any interest to attend. Consider that we don't have any advertisement issue as we announce the programs and events in SBS Farsi programs. And also the situation is the same in a student association in UNSW or UTS. The members are all the first generation. I'm wondering if the situation is the same in Vietnamese community or in Italian community and in the student association. How do you engage the second generation in the community events?
So I think that the prevailing view would be that there are two strategies that I think that you can engage second generation Iranians. I think that the first is to empower them. I think that, to give them responsibility, to show them that, they are part of this cause as well. And to, I guess, make them realize that it's not a top-down approach, but it's like a grassroots approach where they themselves can, make their own events, they themselves are a part of this and there's ownership for it. Because I think that most second generations Australians, whether it's Vietnamese or Italian, if they're kind of dictated what to do or forced to come to events, forced to come to social activities, they feel like it's not their thing, and they're more likely to be disengaged. I think that it's important to empower them and to say maybe here we have these these resources, do whatever you like with them, and most of the time I think that you realize that they are capable, they have talents, and they're most likely going to create something that's great for them, and then they'll bring their friends and other second generation people with them. I think that's the first thing. I think the second thing is to realize that second generation Australians, they have a different, I guess, worldview than first generation Australians. I think the second generation Australians, they have the best of both worlds. I have the best of my parents' culture, the Vietnamese culture. I'm able to cherry pick. I have the best of that culture, but at the same time, I have the best of Australian culture as well because I grew up in that. And I think that it's important for them to be able to bring that into your community. Like it's important for them to be able to bring their own twists and their own subculture, if for a lack of a better word, their own subculture into your association. Because I think that their culture is going to be nuanced. It's going to be different to first generation, to the first generation. So I think that it's important to empower them, one, but also to recognize that they have differences as well, and to be able to have those two cultures coexist.
Lorenzo?
I agree with what Justin said, the majority, and our problem, for example, within COASIT, it's not easy. Like we have a good youth group, and let me tell you, finding young that want to get involved for the good of the community, hen's teeth, absolutely. So don't feel Robinson Crusoe that you have an issue. Though in a board of 11 over the last 34 years that I've been involved with COASIT, I've managed to recruit 2 in their 30s. So I think that what Justin was saying is that you need to empower them, you need to make them feel that sometimes today, I have 2 daughters, so I know, the psyche of, and they're 33 to 32, you killed me, 30 and 26. So therefore, theirs is like, well, what am I going to get out of this? I've tried to get them to come to the meeting. I mean, I've been involved there for, a long time, and they just won't do it because they feel that I would be a problem, right? However, they look at it, but me as the president, and I'm looking at a succession plan and making sure that there's somebody there to keep running the activities. You look at it, you can't have a cut and you start again with a new generation. They have to understand the politics behind it. When you're dealing with politicians, let me tell you, it's a nightmare. And therefore, you need to know this guy knows that guy, knows that guy. So when you're dealing with all the problems that we have to deal with on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis, the more you know, the better it is. And obviously, that's the part that a lot of them don't understand. You have to do a bit of the hard yards to get there. Some of them, expect it to happen overnight and to be given all of that control. You have to earn it. So therefore, it's difficult. But I do say that, we've managed to get a few people, and I mean, we're nursing them through. So. But there is a future, let's hope.
Yes, the gentleman.
Hi, my name is Lewis. I'm a volunteer here at SSI. As a result of recent events in Europe, there's been conversation in the media about the contribution that migrants have made to the countries in which they've settled. And I think there was something written fairly recently about the contribution that migrants have made in Australia. My question perhaps to those who who know, has there been any research done? And what is the result of that research in terms of the contribution, however it's measured, that migrants have made to Australia?
I know that there's been a little bit of research done by the Diversity Council, particularly around the benefits of having migrants in your workforce. But I don't know exactly, that's not exactly my area, so I don't know what the results are, but there is a little bit of research. Yeah, and I would suggest go to the Diversity Council first.
Oh, yes.
Yes, there is. In the years that I've been exposed to the many speeches and whatever else, Snowy Electric Scheme was one of them, where there was an incredible high percentage of European migrants were involved in the construction industry. I can tell you that whether you're looking at the marble industry here in Sydney, for example, there was Malocca Brothers, Transfield came out through Marco Franco Giornonactis. So there's quite a number of of individuals that stand out. But as a whole, I can tell you that there have been studies made, and there is, I believe, a decent contribution by that migrant that came into the country.
I think there's probably also, just from my perspective working in the media, there's also a lot to be said, not just for statistical research on this, but just simply having role models and prominent people from an ethnic background. I think that can also go a long ways as well. And, and at a community level, what Lorenzo mentions can certainly be, known, right? People may know a lot of Italians worked in the Snowy Hydro scheme, which is I think it still is Australia's biggest infrastructure project that it ever put together. But there's a lot to be said. I think when you do have prominent Australians, just I say Do for the Vietnamese community. I know he's become very mainstream. He's probably been a great example, and you see others. I mean, even Marita Cheng, I think I've pronounced the name right, who was a young lady who was the Young Australian of the Year at some point, and she's from an engineering background as well as a Malaysian or Chinese background.
It's not only the contribution that migrants will make in terms of construction in the new society that they live in, and there's no doubt the Stone Mountain scheme stands out. If it wasn't for migrants, it wouldn't have been filled. But it's also the fact that when you're going to get additional people, that in itself will generate economic activity, because immediately you'll need to generate activity in terms of housing and social services, etc., which governments will provide through stimulus, and that will really generate and supercharge the economy of the economies in terms of where they're located. So that's certainly something that is not lost on people. And I'm sure there's plenty of economic modelling that exists that illustrates that.
So I've been given the one more question warning, so we'll go with the gentleman at the back here.
Two parts, I'll make it brief. The comment on the English issue, I think, is a major one. Peter Rose, I'm a volunteer, has spent a number of sessions out at the community kitchen in Auburn. The biggest problem out there is unquestionably English. How can you go to any country, how can you do anything without understanding the language and understanding what the opportunities are, because you don't understand? SSI today sent out, the New South Wales government have an English for Employment program starting up at Western Sydney University College for free for qualified permanent Australian residents. So that's terrific. It's a great start. Secondly, every Australian, apart from Aboriginals, is an immigrant. And I think I've heard a lot of comment today, and I think the average Australian, it's a terrible term, hugely appreciates the value of immigrants into Australia. I think there is a percentage, and I don't know what it is, maybe it's the 10% figure that you got back to earlier. They'll never change. They're the ones that cause the problems, they're the ones that cause the names, they're the ones that get the headlines. They're the ones that end up on Alan Jones. And I'm afraid it's education will stop that problem, but How you ever get to that last 10%, I've got no idea. I don't think they're interested.
Okay, so look, I think that's all the time we have tonight, I'm afraid. But look, our panelists, I'm sure if you grab them quickly after this panel, you might be able to put your questions to them. I'm sure there's still many questions out there. But yeah, otherwise I'm going to hand things back over to Carolina.
I just want to make a comment on your question, Luis, about the entrepreneurship and the contributions that refugees and migrants make to Australia. There was an article on The Guardian on Friday, and our CEO, Valerie Remiliotis, comment to that article. And the article was on a report, recently released by the Australian Bureau of Statistics on the entrepreneurship of refugees and migrants in Australia. So the article basically says that refugees are creating new jobs, that they're actually the difference between the jobs created by refugees in comparison to the rest of Australia is there's quite a difference to what to highlight, and certainly makes a point on what you were just saying and commenting on. Well, thank you very much. I was just would like to thank our panel again and our facilitator for doing such an amazing job, and all our speakers for being here tonight. And thank you to the audience as well for coming along. We hope to see you back for another speaker series event next year. We'll be back here next year, and we'll certainly keep you updated on the topics and speakers that will be featuring on the program. We taking the speaker series for the last event of 2015 here in Newcastle. We're going to be there on the 7th of October. So if you happen to be around, please make sure to join us on the night. Thank you very much.